First of all, I would like to apologize for my less than perfect English with the heavy Argentinian accent. When I came to Heathrow yesterday, the guy at the immigration told me what's the purpose of my visit, pleasure or business. I told him to give a lecture, so he told me you can go in, but you have to promise you won't talk about the Falklands. I suspect I am going to speak about a much more inflammatory issue than the Falklands. I beg you to put aside all the stereotypes you may have and all the demonization you have been exposed to in the media and all the prejudices and doubt everything. I could choose the easy way to prove that the motion is wrong. The easy way is that should it be right that Israel is destroying itself with its settlements policy, I would expect an overwhelming support for settlements in Arab countries. But we don't, of course. But that is too easy. Look, if it were right, you can justify a motion like that on two grounds. On the moral ground, you could suggest that Israel is eroding its moral standing, and I hear that argument with its settlement policy, or on strategic grounds. Israel is making itself more vulnerable with its settlements policy. But the fact is that neither of those two arguments is true. I would like to start with the moral one because, in my opinion, is the more important. And that in which more disinformation and defamation is being spread. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Jewish-Palestinian conflict, call it whatever way you like, is a peculiar one. You cannot compare it, for instance, with the Israeli-Egyptian dispute. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a conflict like no other one in the world, in the sense that there are two ethnic groups, Jews and Palestinians, that have their beliefs, their historical narratives. And I dare to say, even if I'm criticized by some of my colleagues, that both are sincere. I'm not saying I don't want to judge if they are right or wrong. Both are sincere. I feel that Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. I am deeply touched by Hebron in Judea and by Safed in Galilee, in the first one in the post-67 Israel, the first one in the pre-67 Israel too. And Mahmoud Abbas is deeply touched by both, by Hebron and by Safed. He too is deeply touched by both. I see Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, and they see it sincerely as a 19th century colonialist endeavor. Israel, not the settlements, because they consider themselves the natives, and us, the Afrikaners that came to usurp their land. Now, how do you resolve such a dispute? There is no other dispute like that in the world. You could suggest that partition, the so-called two states, is the just solution. Maybe. But what happens when one side accepts partition? And we saw the maps, the partition proposed in 1947 with improbable borders for the Jewish state and without Jerusalem. I wasn't born that time, but we, the Jews, went out to the squares of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Haifa to dance Hora in the squares. And they attacked us that very same night, not in order to get a better partition, in order to annihilate us. Until 1967, from 1947 to 1967, the Arabs, the Palestinians had the opportunity to sign a peace treaty with Israel along the Green Line. But instead, in 1964, they established the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, to liberate Tel Aviv, not to liberate Hebron. And then they attacked in order again to annihilate Israel. Now, I want you to listen very attentively to what I'm going to say now, because in my subjective opinion, it's sheer logic and ethics. You cannot go to square one after such an act. When you reject partition and attack the other side in order to take it all by force, you lost the moral ground to demand partition. By the way, it was done again in the year 2000, when our Prime Minister Ehud Barak proposed partition in Camp David to Yasser Arafat with President Bill Clinton in Camp David. Yasser Arafat, as the leader of the Palestinians, not only rejected it, but 3 months later, he launched the most vicious terrorist attack of the modern era, the so-called Second Intifada. So from a moral ground, we came back to our land rightfully. We were ready to relinquish the most sacred parts, the most important parts of our patrimony, of our national patrimony. But the Palestinians rejected it. They could have a state, they could divide the land. They decided that the rule of the game is by force. And we prevailed using the rules of the game they decided upon. From a moral point of view, our presence in Judea and Samaria and the so-called West Bank, erroneously called West Bank, is morally impeccable. Yes, in a 100-year war, we made mistakes and we made injustices. Yes, of course, you cannot in a 100-year so bloody conflict not make any injustice. We did our share of injustices. But in the moral balance between Jews and Palestinians, we have the upper hand by far. And we have an inalienable right to be and to live in Judea and Samaria. Now you could say, okay, it is just. You have a moral justification to live and to build houses and gardens and wineries in Judea and Samaria, but it is not wise. It's a stupid policy. That will bring, even if you will die, you will commit suicide with justice. But no, the contrary is the truth. I heard Mr. Zegart talking about what will happen if the two-state solution does not crystallize. And this is the second preconception I beg you to free yourself of. The two-state solution, the two-states formula does not solve the conflict in the Middle East. On the contrary, it will aggravate it. I live in a small community in Western Samaria named Ma'ale Shomron. From my home in Ma'ale Shomron, every morning I look at Tel Aviv as if it were in the palm of my hands. The Azrieli Towers, I see that the Azrieli Towers, the new icon of Tel Aviv, are in its place, in their place, and then I'd go to work knowing that everything is okay in Tel Aviv. The thought that if instead of my wife, my daughter, and myself, in Ma'ale Shomron, in that very same window, an independent Palestinian state will be, looking and yearning for Jaffa, looking and yearning for the places that they consider their national patrimony from high above, because in the map you don't see the topography. By the way, much closer than the distance from Heathrow to London. Much higher than Heathrow, of course, to London, completely dominating the landscape. The thought that that will bring the Palestinians to accept partition as a fait accompli, it will not tempt them to launch a new aggression to wipe out Israel from the map, is in the best case naive. In the worst case, I prefer not to characterize it. Without Judea and Samaria, without the high hills of Judea and Samaria, an uninterrupted Islamic fundamentalist territory that starts in Kabul, Afghanistan, and ends in Tel Aviv, Israel, without any natural barrier exists. Only a fence will separate Tel Aviv from the Islamic-dominated territory that ends in Kabul, Afghanistan. That is suicide. That is suicide. Now, we did that experiment. Why should we guess? We did that experiment in the infamous summer of 2005. I think it was Albert Einstein that once said that if you do the same experiment twice and expect different results, then you are no scientist. Maybe he used a more offensive word. The experiment was the withdrawal from Gaza. We evacuated every single Jew from there, civilian or military. A de facto independent Palestinian state was established in Gaza, and we all know the consequence. The consequence is that every single penny, every single cent, every single euro and dollar and pound that was contributed to the newly formed de facto independent state, Palestinian state in Gaza, was used to amass armaments against Israel, to form a new launching pad for an aggression against Israel, not for highways, not for schools, not for hospitals, not for universities. The difference, and this is my summing, my concluding remark, the difference is that Israel can survive an Iranian proxy state in Gaza because the surrounding areas are not very densely populated. Of course, it's not a good situation, but we can somehow cope with it. The same thing in Judea and Samaria, and it will be inevitably the same thing, inevitably. By coup d'etat, by gun, or by ballot, the Hamas will take control of the new Palestinian state, will endanger the very physical existence of the state of Israel. Therefore, the settlements do not endanger Israel's existence, but guarantee it. Thank you.